Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today for our virtual community meeting. My name is Perry Dugard Owens, and our team is happy to assist TDOT today in hosting this meeting. Today you will learn more about the multimodal recommendations in TDOT Region 1 as part of TDOT's study of needs for the entire I-40 corridor as well as the I-81 corridor. A few items to note while we are waiting for the meeting to start. Since we are in a virtual environment, please be sure to mute your sound so that we do not have any background noise. If you have questions, please enter the question in the chat box to the right of your screen, and we will answer them in order during our Q&A segment. If you do not hear your question directly, it's because we are grouping similar questions by topic. This is the first of 4 virtual meetings that will happen in each TDOT region along the corridor, from East Tennessee all the way over to West Tennessee. Please share our virtual meeting information with your friends in other regions of the corridor. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce you to our host for the evening, TDOT Region 1 Rep, Troy Ebert. Troy?
Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for joining us today. This is the second round of public meetings for our I-4081 multimodal corridor study. My name is Troy Everett. I serve as the planning supervisor for Region 1. We're happy to host you today. The purpose of this study is to identify current and future needs along the I-40 and 81 corridor statewide over the next 20 years and to develop solutions for TDOT to consider. I want to emphasize that this study does not make any final decisions about what projects we actually move forward. A lot of that will deal with funding and a lot of other very complex things, but this is the baseline that we'll start moving forward with. Some of you have participated in the public meetings and comment period that we had earlier this year when we were at the stage of identifying needs. This evening's meeting is designed to provide you with an overview of the types of issues that have been told to us and along I-40 and 81 and the range of solutions that we're looking at. We will also address questions, so feel free to use the chat box to enter questions and answers into that chat box, and we'll definitely look at those and try to get those answered. Now, let me introduce you, Gene Stevens with WSP, who's going to lead the discussion and provide the overview for the study and findings for the potential solutions. Gene?
Okay, thanks, Troy. I really appreciate everybody who took time out of their day to come and watch this presentation and ask questions, and then hopefully afterward provide comments. The first thing I want to do tonight is a quick recap of the study purpose for those of you who weren't around for the round 1 public meetings that Troy just mentioned. Then we'll talk about the types of needs and the solutions that are being presented today for comment. We're not planning to get too deep into the weeds today, but I do have a couple of team members with me who may field questions with me at the end. And as Troy just mentioned, you're welcome to type your questions into the box at any time during the presentation, especially if you think you might forget your question. But we are going to wait till the end to start responding, since sometimes a question will end up being answered just a few slides later. All right, in terms of what this study is for, it covers a 20-year time frame with recommendations that'll be phased so that it includes short and midterm improvements as well as long-term ones. This is a data-driven planning process to identify both current and future interstate needs with input, as Troy said, from people who live and work along the corridor and use it for travel. And the study will result in a pool of projects that decision makers will be able to consider as funding becomes available. As Troy said, nothing gets decided from this study or tonight's meeting. This is by far the longest interstate corridor in Tennessee. It totals about 530 miles when you add both I-40 and 81 together. It spans the entire state from the Arkansas state line to the Virginia and North Carolina state lines, passing through a total of 28 counties and connecting 8 of the state's 11 metropolitan areas. And as you heard, this evening's meeting is focused on the portion of interstate that's located within TDOT's Region 1, running basically from Rockwood Mountain on the west up to Bristol at the Virginia state line on the east, and down to the North Carolina state line as you go through Cott County. And we will be covering both I-40 and I-81 because Region 1 has both. This slide shows the project stages in relation to public engagement across the bottom there. In round one of our public meetings, we talked about current and future interstate conditions and got input from you on where the needs are. At this meeting, we're going to be talking about the potential solutions to those needs before we complete the final study. And we'll be taking public comment this month through an online survey, and that link will be provided to you on one of our final slides. Here are the major types of solutions that we're going to talk about today for I-40 and I-81. First would be highway expansion. That could include new lanes, it could include interchange upgrades, or just ramp improvements at interchanges. We will talk about safety solutions, both on the I-40 and 81 corridor itself, and also on the main detour routes for the interstate. We'll talk about something we lovingly refer to as TSMO, which is Transportation Systems Management and Operation. That's an approach to managing the existing system more efficiently rather than adding physical capacity. We'll have solutions related to freight, ways to promote safer and more efficient travel of goods across the state. And we'll talk about transit, ways to make sure we're providing options for people who either can't or don't want to drive, especially looking between regions of the state and across Tennessee. Now, even before this study began, there were already some projects identified for I-4081 through the IMPROVE Act that was passed by the Tennessee General Assembly a few years ago in association with a gas tax increase to be used to pay for those projects. And here on this slide, you see the projects in the IMPROVE Act within TDOT's Region 1. They include I-81 widening in Jefferson County between exits 1 and 4, a future interchange in Cott County in the area of O'Neill Road, and then some interchange improvements in the downtown Knoxville area, partly at I-275, but also probably extending to looking at the area of I-40, 640 on the west side of 640. While all of these projects are technically in development, some will likely happen sooner than others. But regardless of when they occur, it's really important to keep the context that these projects are on the books when we're looking at other improvements to the corridor like we will be today. So there are a lot of recommendations on this map, and in particular, if you can see my mouse moving, there are a lot of recommendations in Knoxville, in Knox County. So we'll come back to that area in a couple of minutes with a larger map. But let's start with this one. At the far left of the map, this yellow dot you see with the legend up there, yellow is potential interchange improvements. And we're distinguishing that between potential interchange improvements and potential ramp improvements. An interchange improvement could be replacing the interchange with an actual different kind of interchange, whereas ramp improvements might be something like, well, this ramp needs 2 lanes instead of 1, or we need to change the way the ramp intersects when you get down to the arterial road. So that would be the difference there between the yellow and the blue. At the far left, this yellow dot in Roane County is a recommended interchange improvement at exit 347, which is Harriman, to reconfigure it to provide better operations and safety. I said we'll come back to Knoxville in a minute. So as we move east into Jefferson County, we've carried over the projects from the previous page that you saw. For instance, we're showing with the yellow line that there's already a widening proposed on I-81 between exits 1 and 4. But we are also, with this study, recommending some geometric and operational improvements at exit 421, which is where I-40 splits off southward toward North Carolina and I-81 begins. There were some improvements made to that interchange about 10 years ago as a result of TDOT's first I-4081 study, but there is still room for improvement. One thing that we would be looking at is where the green line is shown, adding a new auxiliary lane heading eastbound between exit 417, which is State Route 92 at Jefferson City, and the I-81 split. Continuing along I-40 going south here toward North Carolina, as mentioned, that's the orange square from the previous map showing that IMPROVE Act includes a proposed new interchange at O'Neill Road. But there's also here a yellow dot including this study's recommendation of an interchange at an existing, improvement at an existing interchange at exit 447 at Hartford Road to lengthen those acceleration and deceleration lanes. Now, looking along I-81 up into the Tri-Cities, we have recommended improvements to the ramps at the I-81, I-26 interchange. Heard quite a bit of public input about that in Sullivan County. That's a tight cloverleaf that causes some issues for larger vehicles like trucks and buses. And also recommended improvements up at exit 74 at State Street, where we're recommending to improve the northbound entrance ramp for better operations and safety. The reddish orangish dot up here indicates a potential new interchange in the future in the Kingsport area around I-81 and Buttermilk Road. That was identified as a potential future access point to I-81 through other local and regional transportation planning efforts. So that covers the improvements on this map other than what's in Knox County. I'll now switch to a map that zooms in a little further on the Knoxville area of I-40. You see quite a long list here. And again, we won't get into the weeds, but if one of these needs a little more explanation, please go ahead and feel free to type the questions in to the box. And I do have a member of the team that can probably address that pretty well. So let us know. Starting at the west end, you see proposed interchange upgrades at 369 and 373, which is Watt Road and Campbell Station Road. Both of those, particularly Campbell Station Road, very short ramps, hard to safely merge and exit. Also, you see in red a proposed widening all the way from the I-75 junction over to Lovell Road at exit 374. Then proposing additional widening from Lovell Road up to the western terminus of 640 at exit 385. And then here's one to extend the westbound lanes from Alcoa Highway as you're getting on, so that one lane will ultimately exit to 640 and one lane would continue through on 40. This whole area is an area that does repeatedly bog down, and this is something we feel would improve traffic flow. In addition, when you're on the eastbound side in the paper mill area, proposed here is a separation of the eastbound traffic, so between Paper Mill and 640. So there are some folks getting on right now at Paper Mill that want to merge all the way over instead of getting off at 640, and the weaving motion is just creating a lot of congestion and safety issues. So one potential solution there would be to separate traffic so that if you come on at Paper Mill, you're going to end up exiting onto 640. Going back to the west part of the county, also proposing to improve off ramps at Lovell Road and at 640. And then you also see a proposed ramp improvement for the Western Avenue interchange. Knoxville's growing. And most importantly, I think one thing people in other cities don't recognize is that the fact that I-75 runs concurrently with I-40 for about 20 miles here means you've got double the interstate traffic. So this section does have some of the highest traffic counts in Tennessee. All right, we're going to talk about three major types of safety improvements for the corridor. The first one is what this slide's concerning, which is incident management. Some of you are probably familiar with TDOT's Help Patrol Service, in which there's a set of TDOT service trucks that circulate regularly on the interstate system throughout the Knoxville area on these routes that are shown here in yellow. And when they see or get a report of a disabled vehicle or a crash, they head to that area and they help to get the incident cleared so that normal traffic flow is restored. Now, you might think this is just a nice thing for people who happen to get a flat tire or get involved in a wreck, but all of us who drive I-40, 81 are actually benefiting when those people get helped, because every time there's a primary incident, there's a high chance that there's going to be a secondary incident. For example, if there's a crash ahead, you're probably going to get vehicles that are just in front of you that are slowing down or even stopped. And a driver who isn't paying attention will end up rear-ending the stopped vehicles in front of them. And now we have two incidents. So getting that first incident cleared quickly avoids a lot of secondary incidents as well, and that's safer, and it also improves congestion. So what we're showing here on the slide is an eventual expansion of help services beyond what's currently being operated in Knoxville. Now, it would not be full help services like what's currently in yellow, because outside of the major population centers, it would be cost prohibitive to have vehicles that are just driving up and down the interstate all day waiting to be needed. So this would be sort of a help light program where vehicles would be available at strategic locations along the corridor so that they're ready with people who could drive over quickly when needed to help manage an incident. And that also means TDOT needs to be able to detect incidents outside of the urban areas in a timely manner. And that requires some additional stuff that we'll talk about in just a minute. Here's the next major area of safety improvement, and that would be the construction of truck climbing lanes and potentially runaway truck ramps in certain parts of the corridor where there are steep grades. One reason we look at truck climbing lanes as a safety project is because it creates more traffic conflict when vehicles on the same stretch of road are operating at really different speeds. And on a steep grade, as you're well aware, a heavy truck could be going at least 20 to 30 miles an hour slower than the cars next to it. So truck climbing lanes can do a good bit, not just for traffic flow, but for safety. And you see here on this slide the locations where truck climbing lanes should be evaluated on 40 and 81. Now I'll say these are approximate areas. Some of these lengths are fairly long. There would not likely be a truck climbing lane that's actually 7 miles long, but this is where they should be evaluated, and it will take a little bit of additional engineering to determine exactly where it should be located. There are currently no truck runaway ramps that I'm aware of on 40 other than nearby, other than North Carolina, for those of you who drive down Old Fort Mountain. And goodness hopes no one would ever need one. But truck incidents certainly take longer to clear than any others, and they have the potential to be really devastating. So it's something that could at least be considered. So you see here the locations that are being proposed for evaluation are primarily in this rolling area as you come down off Rockwood Mountain into the Rockwood, Harriman, Kingston area. And then on 81 in Upper East Tennessee, a climbing lane on 81 in the vicinity of mile markers 15 to 23, and then again around 48 to 51 mile markers. Now, finally, on safety, we've identified certain areas for other types of roadway safety improvements, either on I-40 itself, like you see here in Cocke County, where we've got a pretty sharp set of curves as you go toward North Carolina between 443 and 451. But we're also identifying some routes here that are designated detours for I-40 and I-81. And when traffic is diverted, you're dumping an awful lot of vehicles onto a road that's not accustomed to carrying interstate levels of traffic, including the number of trucks that the interstate typically carries. Nobody's proposing these routes would be upgraded to interstate standards, but there are certainly some spots along these routes that could be beefed up to help reduce the amount of impact and maybe improve safety during those occasional times when traffic has to be diverted. And I believe since the time we started the study, the State Route 93 improvement may already have been completed. So good, we got a quick win. All right, let's go to management and operations of transportation. What is it? Well, first of all, it's a chance to maximize the efficiency of what we've already got. And that could involve technology, but it doesn't always have to. And I'll give an example in just a minute. In a lot of cases, it can delay the need to physically expand the facility. At some point, if growth continues to happen, you probably will need to add a lane. But a lot of times you can get by for quite a while just by managing what you've got. There are a lot of different strategies out there that fall into this category. The 4 that I'll highlight here, the first one is real-time traveler information. And that is an example of something that doesn't really require technology. Real-time traveler information has been around since radio stations first began providing traffic reports, but it's just gotten more sophisticated over time. I'm sure a lot of you are aware that TDOT now has its SMARTWAY system that can give you real-time traffic and weather by phone or looking at maps on their website or a smartphone app. A next one to talk about is called ICM, which is Integrated Corridor Management. That's an approach to manage movement in a corridor by balancing the use of balancing traffic among the various routes and modes that are available. And to some extent, this is already happening. In the old days, the traffic reporter would suggest an alternate route, which is a way of integrating the management of the corridor. A more modern example would be Waze. If you're using Waze in your car, it tells you to reroute. What incident corridor management does is take it a step further by formalizing cooperation among the different agencies who operate parts of the system. And as an example, TDOT's responsible for traffic flow on the interstate, whereas a city or county would be in charge of maintaining the parallel highways. Here in East Tennessee, Region 1 has some really good examples where this type of active coordinated management is already happening during UT football games and race days at Bristol Motor Speedway. So there's already a lot of coordination going on between TDOT and local officials to handle all that traffic. And the opportunity for ICM here would be to broaden that kind of cooperation beyond just when special events are occurring. Managed lanes is another strategy to talk about. Those of you who travel in the Nashville area are aware of the high occupancy vehicle lanes, HOV lanes. Those are where you have to have at least 2 people in the car in order to use the lane. There are a lot of challenges with these, and enforcement is one of the biggest ones. So a lot of states are moving towards something called a hot lane, It stands for high occupancy toll. What that allows is that HOV vehicles, those with 2 or more people, can still travel for free. But if you're a single occupant vehicle and there's still space in that special lane, for a price, you can use it. So HOT is kind of a newer version of what states are looking at that have HOV lanes, and it's a possibility for Tennessee. Another possibility is this final strategy that I've got on the slide, and it's ramp metering. This is an approach to optimize traffic in all the lanes as opposed to just having one managed lane. If you've not seen it before, a lot of states have ramp metering. It's basically you put a traffic signal on the ramp. Green means you can enter the interstate as normal. Red means you've got to wait. And it may sound counterintuitive, but having people wait on the ramp actually can make their total trip take less time. I know it doesn't sound believable, but the data will back it up. And ramp metering is most effective when every ramp would be metered within a segment of a corridor. So it would normally be for multiple exits. Now, just a minute ago, I mentioned traveler information as an example of a TSMO strategy. And an example is SMARTWAY, TDOT's SMARTWAY system. In the lower left corner of the slide, you see an example of the video camera feed that you can view on TDOT's website for all these different locations along I-40 and 81. But I think it's important to note as we talk about management and operations that this equipment, I mean, it's really handy for traveler information, but that's not all that it does. It's actually able to collect data that lets TDOT implement all kinds of other management and operations strategies, including the ones that I just talked about. So here are some potential management strategies to consider for this corridor in Region 1, and all of them would be in the immediate Knoxville area. A minute ago, we mentioned ICM, which manages traffic by moving it between available routes in a larger corridor. In this part of the I-40-81 corridor, the most obvious example of an alternative route is Kingston Pike. However, Kingston Pike's often pretty congested itself, not a great alternative necessarily. But the town of Farragut and city of Knoxville are currently upgrading their traffic signal equipment on Kingston Pike to let them more easily change the signal timing in response to significant changes in traffic. So this kind of technology is really going to help support coordination with TDOT when traffic needs to be shifted between I-40 and the alternate. So steps like that make ICM more feasible. The other thing recommended here is looking at ramp metering for a portion of I-40, generally between the Level Road interchange and downtown Knoxville. We think this would probably provide better mobility for the corridor than a managed lane like an HOV or an HOT lane would, but further analysis would be needed before implementing anything. There's other technology available too that can help traffic flow and safety along the corridor, and that relates to heavy trucks. I think all of us are probably aware of how the weigh stations on I-40 and 81 affect traffic operations because trucks that are leaving the weigh station are trying to merge back out onto the highway at a pretty slow speed. And when the sites in West Knoxville and up in Greene County were originally selected for these weigh stations, they weren't as close to urban areas as they are now after a lot of decades of growth. So the impacts are becoming a lot more noticeable. There's something called weigh in motion. Those devices and sensors provide an opportunity to improve the efficiency of weigh stations. They can record truck axle weights and gross vehicle weights without actually requiring trucks to make a complete stop, which is a much more efficient process than a static weigh station. In addition, this technology gives an opportunity to collect data on traffic volumes, axle spacings for trucks, vehicle classification, and speeds. And that kind of data can help TDOT a lot with pavement and bridge design, enforcement, and even planning studies related to truck size and weight. So there's a lot of potential benefits here. And what you see on this slide is that TDOT's already been looking at the weigh stations across the state and selecting certain ones to pilot this technology. And you see that both Knoxville and the Greene County weigh stations are proposed for that. And I think that they're already in development. Now, if you visit Cracker Barrel, you may have seen electric vehicle charging stations like the one in this photo. Electric vehicles are becoming a lot more popular, not just for cars, but for heavy trucks, believe it or not. Walmart actually just purchased a large fleet of electric trucks to use. They can be really cost effective, not only because of fuel savings, but because the engines are simpler. They have a lot fewer parts, which means less to maintain. And although trucks are a lot cleaner than they used to be, they still contribute most of the air pollution that's related to traffic. So going electric can be good for our health, in addition to conserving those non-renewable resources. Regardless, though, of whether your electric vehicle is a car or a truck, You're more likely to use one if you know that you can count on finding a charging station when you need it. Federal Highway Administration has created an alternative fuels corridor program intended to build a network of alternative fuel and electric vehicle charging stations across the nation's major highways. And Federal Highways program has two classifications. You're either corridor ready or corridor pending. And you see on this slide that the section of I-40 shown in that yellow-orange color is already considered to be corridor ready. And what that means is that it meets the guidelines that we're showing here on the slides. There are fast charging stations available to the public at least every 50 miles. Those stations are no further than 5 miles off of the corridor. And they're equipped with multiple connector types. And one reason that's important is because the technology is still continuing to evolve and it's not completely standardized. And if you're like me and you have 8 different kinds of cords to charge your phone, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Now, talking about transit, I-40 and I-81 play a really important role in transit service in several different contexts across the state. First and foremost, I would say they are critical to operations for rural public transit agencies. They provide daily service to citizens that are traveling to and from larger urban areas, mostly for medical appointments, but also for other services and for jobs. So the I-40-81 corridor is the place that a lot of those vehicles are traveling in order to get their passengers to and fro. It's also the backbone for privately operated intercity bus service crossing the state, most notably Greyhound. And then within urban areas, you see here in purple, there are local fixed route services in these urban areas, and then they do sometimes use I-40 and I-81 for local or maybe regional express service. And I want to point out that transit agencies, the operators of those buses, and their riders can actually benefit from a lot of the same infrastructure improvements that we have presented in other slides. Any projects to improve traffic congestion in urban areas will keep those vehicles from having to wait in the same traffic. Things like truck climbing lanes are going to be of assistance, either because a bus needs to be able to go more slowly without getting run over, or in some cases, if it's able to pass a truck, it's benefiting from that truck climbing lane. And finally, but most important perhaps, is improvements to interchanges that have tight ramps or short ramps, because the challenges related to steering a bus are actually pretty similar to the challenges facing truckers. So these physical improvements can be beneficial to transit as well. There's another major opportunity that's been identified through this study, and it's for TDOT and those local transit agencies to partner on the creation of future park and ride lots along the corridor. Now, some of you may know that the Nashville area already has regional commuter transit service. Some of it is buses operating along the interstate between Nashville and some of the further out suburbs. But they also have commuter rail service that parallels I-40 on the east side of Nashville. So there's regional commuter transit service there, not so much elsewhere in the state, but other agencies in East Tennessee see the potential for that kind of service over the next 10 to 20 years, if there are convenient park and ride lots available. So this map shows locations along 40 and 81 that have been identified as convenient locations for future park and ride lots. And you see first in Upper East Tennessee on I-81 in Sullivan County, those desired locations would be along the stretch of 81 between exits 56 and 66. In Knox County, 2 clusters, new park and rides on the further west side of town to facilitate commuter bus service from Farragut, West Knox County area to downtown Knoxville, and then another cluster of exits that would be a little closer in to support commuter bus service from the Cedar Bluff area into downtown. So these are good opportunities. In a lot of cases, these transit agencies don't have the occasion very often to acquire property. So when they're trying to acquire property for a new park and ride lot, it's something that is a little more of an administrative burden for staff and perhaps not something they're used to negotiating. And when TDOT's making an interchange improvement, there might be an opportunity perhaps to add some right-of-way acquisition and then work with the transit agency to develop that into a park and ride lot. So those are the kinds of opportunities that are out there. Now that concludes our formal presentation. We're about to open up the question and answer period, but first I want to take a minute to point out the other ways that you can see on this slide that you can either learn more about this study or provide input on what you've heard at the meeting. In the upper right corner, you see a link to TDOT's website for this study, and that has other materials that you can review. And these slides will be posted on the website tomorrow. So you'll be able to come back and open these slides up if you lose the links or you want to come back and review something. Also in the upper right is a link to the online survey I talked about that we would very much welcome you to take. Now, if you prefer to make comments separately from the survey, or if you have other questions after this meeting that you weren't able to ask or didn't get answered, there's some information in the bottom left corner here for Troy, who you heard from earlier here in the Region 1 office at TDOT, and for Joan Barnfield, who is TDOT's overall project manager for the study. And then finally, if you like to use stamps, there is a mailing address here as well that you can send Joan a letter. So with that, let me take a pause and let's take a look at questions that may have come up in the Q&A box. Okay. We have a question here. When will the I-40 275 interchange improvement start construction? My understanding is that will probably be a little while. I think there's still some investigation as to exactly how wide of an area needs to be looked at. It might be that it's not just the immediate 275 area. I think I mentioned earlier that it could well be that the problem goes a little further west as well. So I think I'm understanding that there's a separate study looking at that location. So I would say it'll be a little while. Question on the help light route. Would it extend past the 26 intersection to the Virginia state line? The map ended at I-26. Yes, it should have. Thank you for that correction. Yes, the proposed help light service would actually extend throughout the whole I-40/81 corridor. So thank you. We will make sure that that final plan has a map that shows it going all the way out. Absolutely. Okay. Here is a question about how to enforce hot lanes. All right. I think if we can get him unmuted, I would like to ask Chris Swenson, who is a member of our team, to talk about that. Chris is an expert in transportation systems management and operations who is out of our firm's Atlanta office and has actually been on the forefront of a lot of the things that are being tried around the state or around the country. Sorry. Chris, are you on?
I'm here. Enforcement, Gene, you mentioned before, enforcement of hot lanes has always been the major stumbling block to them. But there are some things that are being piloted now that really show a lot of promise. The original way to do it was to have a trooper be at a certain location and visually look inside the car to see if it had the correct number of people. Unfortunately, that's a very difficult thing to do, so there had to be a traffic stop also. In other words, the trooper had to flag down the vehicle or, chase it and ask it to pull over to verify. And that's a pretty dangerous situation, having the trooper on the side of the road. It's not good for the cars. It's not good for the trooper. So there have been a lot of things proposed. There are three things now that are being piloted. One is a visual using video cameras. That's being piloted in California. They are working diligently to handle the pretty obvious privacy issues that go with it. But it's a camera that is said it can view through the windshield and through the side windows to get the right number of people. That has just started. We're very closely monitoring that. The other are actually two apps that are being used. One is called Go Karma. That's G-O capital C-A-R-M-A. And if you ever want more information, go karma.com. Basically, there's a Bluetooth device that goes into the vehicle and determines the number of other Bluetooth devices that are in the vehicle to determine if the vehicle meets HOV standards to not get charged the toll. They do have a mechanism. I'm not 100% sure what it is. They're a little bit tight with that information to make sure people aren't just leaving 4 or 5 smartphones in the car. The other one is app called Ride Flag. It uses facial differentiation, not facial recognition, that basically you smile into the camera on your phone prior to leaving. They get see how many different faces are in the car. The actual photo never leaves the phone. They just send a basically a number that represents the face. And to make sure people aren't cheating it, sometimes, not very often, but sometimes you'll actually be asked to show the same picture again, the same people again, that is, at the end of the ride. That's being piloted out in Utah, and Go Karma is active in the Dallas area. Gene,
Great,
that's
Chris.
about all I
Yeah,
got.
that was pretty good. Thanks. Those apps sound fun. All right, we have another question here about hot lanes. What is the tolling situation in Tennessee, and what would need to happen to allow hot lanes? That's a great question, a really good one. Some of you may be aware that the General Assembly many years ago, probably 10 years ago, authorized TDOT to do some pilot studies for different toll facilities. I think the current toll legislation only allows tolling if there is a free alternative available. It's not quite clear how that applies to hot lanes. I think the latest conclusion was that it would require some additional legislation in Tennessee to be a lot more specific that hot lanes are allowable. I do think it's a thing that gets discussed on and off, and certainly I think the understanding for this study was that we needed to identify all available options, and then they would be available for decision makers to consider. But yes, you're correct. Right now, legislation would be required to make it permissible to do a hot lane. Let's see. Got a couple of questions here about that issue of separating the traffic at Paper Mill so that folks who got on there would need to get off at 640. Okay, it sounds like there's not a lot of support for that idea. I definitely understand that. We'll take that as a good comment. I got a question here about whether there was any consideration of the bypass that was previously discussed for the Knoxville area. That did come up, and essentially some of you who follow this may be aware that an environmental document was prepared for TDOT, an extensive one, I think rewritten several times, for a proposed Knoxville bypass. And ultimately in 2010, TDOT elected the no build option, ultimately not to build the project. So at that point, that is the status of that project. Okay, we've got a question about a possible new interchange. Oh, the one in the Improve Act for I-40 at O'Neill Road in Cocke County. And the question is, what creates the need at that location? I think that's a good question to ask. We did take a look at that when we did the existing conditions inventory for this study. Currently, we did not find that there are any industrial sites that have been developed or any public utilities extended to that area that would make development feasible. So I would assume that either the interchange would be initiated at the time that there were some investment opportunities coming up, or maybe that if an interchange study would be initiated soon, that would be one of the things they would look at is what is the potential that development would then occur. So good question. How much effect did Morristown have in the study as far as traffic generation and impact? Well, Morristown had just as much impact as everybody else. And when I say that, what I mean is that when we looked at the potential traffic in the future for I-40 and I-81, we used TDOT's statewide travel demand model. And what that does is use a set of population and employment projections for the year 2040 that break it down. There are probably, I would say, at least 8 zones per county, and in the urban areas, much smaller zones. And we coordinated with the planning organizations across the state on those population and employment projections. We then run the model, and it shows us how much traffic is expected on various parts of I-40 and I-81 in the future. Okay, we have a question here about truck-only lanes. I think we're probably going to want to talk with the team, and then we will come back to you and answer your question. And let's see what else. And thank you, by the way, for all of these questions. This has been terrific. You never know how many questions you're going to get. All right, I think that's what we've got for now. If I haven't read your question out, it means that that's one that we're going to touch base. And then since you have signed up for the meeting, we'll be able to directly contact you with an answer. Oh, here's a couple more questions. All I had to do was give you a minute. One question is there a reasonably affordable solution to the I-81, I-26 interchange? Has this been thoroughly studied? Actually, that is a great question to ask, because the I-81, I-26 interchange actually not only affects this corridor, but affects the I-26 corridor. And TDOT just completed an I-26 corridor study like this one. And that interchange was identified, just like this one has identified it, as something that needs study. And one of the short-term recommendations out of that other study was to analyze the I-81, I-26 interchange. So I can't speak to when that interchange analysis might begin, but it's definitely a recommendation that's been made. Now, whether it's affordable is the next question. And that one I can't answer right now. Okay, Chris, this one is a follow-up on the enforcement of HOV lanes. And I think the feeling was that what you talked about was really more for HOV lanes. So could you kind of clarify? Because I think you might have also been talking about hot lanes, but maybe it just didn't come across that way.
Thanks, Jean, and thank you for the follow-up on the question. That may be a little bit my answer may be due to the fact that I've been doing this for quite a while, and I realize that toll enforcement is actually very, very easy. However, we've got to have the occupancy enforcement. So we know how we're going to do that. But the question is, if people are below the HOV number, how do you know folks paid the toll to ride, since the lanes are adjacent to other lanes? There are let's talk about just how do we know if they've paid the toll, and what do we do if they haven't? If they have not paid the toll, there is photo enforcement that uses license plate recognition, and that can either be something that happens automatically by computer, or it can have humans that also take a look at the photo. Usually if you've got a violation, it'll be a human that also takes a look at it. Back when we first started doing the hot lanes, there was concern that we would have bleed over of the scanner for the transponders, how it's generally done, into the other lanes. That has just not materialized. We're able to focus the antenna for the hot lane very precisely, so that if you are even in the adjacent lane, it doesn't happen. Now, let me back up a second. Am I going to tell you that never, ever, 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 ever has it happened? No. But I will tell you it is an extremely rare event, 1 in 10,000 maybe, and probably not even that much. So it's basically, we enforce the toll using photo enforcement. We make sure that we only charge those people that are in the hot lane by focusing the antenna, and obviously doing some pretty significant testing of it before we actually go live with a toll. But excellent question, and I appreciate the follow-up.
Chris, I think this may be one that we also want to get back to the person who asked the question, because I think your answer is right, but I think there may be legislation in Tennessee that doesn't allow video enforcement, which means other methods would need to be used.
And we'll have to deal with that, assuming that hot lanes move forward.
Okay. The question here, will a hot lane system in the Knoxville area be interoperable with those in other states like SunPass, Peach Pass, and NC Quick Pass? Oh, and here's 2 more, Text Tag and Easy Pass. Chris, do you want to tackle that?
Sure, why not? The answer is, gee, I hope so. There has been a requirement from Congress that toll systems become interoperable. In other words, you can use your tag anywhere in the United States. The industry hasn't quite gotten there yet, but my guess is that Tennessee would definitely be, well, I can't say definitely, I can't speak for the state, but looking at the industry, I would say it is very probable that Tennessee would be compatible with Georgia, with North Carolina. You're close to Virginia. That would handle Easy Pass. That would handle Peach Pass. That would handle Sun Pass down in Florida. Text Tag, my guess is that also would be handled. But it is something that the industry is struggling to some extent with right now. So I can't tell you absolutely yes, but I would imagine that it would be looked at very carefully and it would have advantages for it to be interoperable. Gene, that's about all I can say on that.
Okay, these are great questions, folks. Other questions that you may have, either about what you saw in the presentation or maybe what you did not see, something you thought you would see. All right. Well, let me flip back one slide then. And I mentioned that these will be available on TDOT's project website, but I'll ask Perry to close this out for the meeting, but I do want to leave this up on the screen and ask you please to take the survey. Perry?
Yes, thank you, Jean. And thank you all again for joining us today for our virtual community meeting. We hope that you received some valuable information about the study of the I-40 and I-81 corridors. A few reminders, this is the first of 4 virtual meetings that will happen along the corridor. We'll be hosting these from East Tennessee all the way over to West Tennessee. To provide comments and stay up to date on the final results of the study, please see the project webpage shown here on the screen. And thank you so much for joining us, and good night.